Do you have a challenge with authority or with behaving?
Who thinks of behave bandana?
Bandana Tewari, welcome to Significant, podcast by the Yak.
Thank you very much for having me, Soph. What a pleasure.
Oh, it's very nice to have you across a table. Usually we're side by side drinking a glass of wine, but here we are at Double
And
Espresso.
dancing.
Yes, and dancing. And Double Espresso Studios here with a beer in hand. So
as we roll. That's how we roll.
That's how we roll. So your Instagram, I've always found very interesting. Most people just have their name, but yours actually tells you what to do before your name pops up. So behave bandana. So do you have a challenge with authority or with behaving?
Ooh, of course I do. Who thinks of behave bandana? Well, this is the advent of Instagram, where no one thought that would be a new portfolio, your resume for the world as we see it now. So it was all sort of fun and games, and I've always been a maverick in whatever I've done. So there was no question about it that. In fact, my original name for my Instagram was Misbehave Bandana, which I've still registered and not used it because I'm waiting for a juicy moment to see what I want to do with it. But for that moment, I thought Behave Bandana was good enough, not too far out, rebellious, because I was working with Vogue in a very serious position. And it was all fun and games. And there was a time when I thought, damn, I look pretty unprofessional if, I'm sitting in a conference on sustainability in Copenhagen, and then on the screen they flash follow at Behave Bandana when I'm talking about environmental issues. I thought, is it time for me to change it? Then I changed my mind. I think it is wonderful to know that not behind, but within are many layers of personality. That there is the naughty, there is the irreverent, and there is the serious. And that's all in one person. So there was no need for me to change that. If people want to judge me, and maybe that name sounds frivolous, Behave Bandana, it's an assumption that I don't usually behave. And I was thinking, but that's true. So why change it? So I stuck to it.
It's just such a great name and one very easily remembered. So I think that definitely works on that level. Yeah, you're talking about your maverick and then slightly the layers that you are today as a person. I do believe that you come from quite a strict Hindu background, but went to a Catholic school.
Yes.
So, how does that work on the...
In the most magnificent way, because as children, we are not, at least at that point, so indoctrinated into this sort of system of bigotry. For us, it was, sure, I grew up in a Hindu family. I went to temples galore. When we had our holidays, all my friends were going off to London and New York and Paris, and me and my sisters were carted off to the most exquisite temples all over India as an act of pilgrimage. But it was like going on a massive, not ending, like a picnic on trains and, into parts of India that I feel privileged to say that I went to when I was a teenager. Because now we don't even have the time to go around, even in the very country we're living in Indonesia. So my childhood was full of these temples and dancing in the temples and looking at these statues of extraordinary gods and goddesses, and I don't know, we didn't even know how to pray. We just chanted, we learned the chants. That was one part of my life. But it didn't come with a strict hammer of rule. It was a joyous experience that our parents just carted us off to in different parts of India. And then going back to boarding school, which is a very, very strict Catholic convent up in the mountains in Darjeeling, Loreto Convent, beautiful, surrounded by the Kanchenjunga range, taught by Irish nuns, Czechoslovakian nuns, with all uniform. There was no question of makeup and social media, none of that. We were all geeks and living in libraries and reciting Macbeth facing a tequila sunset in the Himalayas.
Wow.
It was extraordinary. And I went to church for 10 years of my life, every Sunday, dressed up in the name of Christ, and, and bowed down to Mother Mary in the grotto and lit candles. But growing up, I realized I didn't feel any sense of dichotomy. Because in the kind of Hinduism that I grew up in my family and the Catholicism in my education, both was full of pageantry and celebration. You know, a Catholic church is as decorative as a Hindu temple. And so for us, the magic, the imagination was ignited by everything from stained glass windows in a church, the candles burning, to fires in temples and temple bells. I think it played a very big role in my later life when I sat down to write stories. That you are very observant of the sounds, the smells, everything that's happening in your peripheral vision, not what you see directly with, two eyes. And I think that is very much a product of living what could look like an incongruous life. But in all honesty, it was delightful. And I took more from it. I didn't feel disadvantaged by it.
So obviously you had amazing education with the nuns, and that took you to, at the end of your school, what were your next steps after finishing?
After I finished school, where we were in absolute isolation, if we didn't see many boys unless you were competing in sports or elocution or debating. We didn't have boyfriends. I'm talking about grade 10. Grade 10 today, you look at the kids, they're grown-ups. And we were naive, still in pinafores and pigtails. And after that, I went to a French foundation school in Calcutta called La Martiniere. And I was there for my 11th and 12th. And that was a city life, which is full of cars and bustling traffic and, sort of buildings that were tall enough, taller than I'd ever seen before. And we felt lost at that time. At least I felt lost because you had to navigate a very cantankerous, noisy environment when we were living up in the hills for 10 years. It was, Heidi in the hills to, it was just an insanely isolated and conservative life. Conservative in the sense that we were not aware of the ills of the world whatsoever. I remember celebrating, we were little girls in kindergarten when Lady Diana got married to Prince Charles. And of course, this is English Catholic school, so we celebrated it was a magnificent celebration at that time. And so living in that world and going to Calcutta, which has been the seat of dissent in post-colonial India, with academics and people are so bright, I felt lost. But it was a city where you are surrounded, your classmates are exemplary women from Bengal whose parents are extremely academic. So they were great singers, philosophers. This is the time in Calcutta where you would have dens. They were called the chai dens, where you would sit with your chai and discuss Kierkegaard and Sophocles and Plato, and then equate it to the political system in India. And the children, the young adults whom I studied with were the products of the families who grew up in that environment. So they were so intelligent. I had no option, out of sheer fear of failure, to pull up my socks and read and educate myself so I could at least try and be at par with these extraordinary girls my age. And that is when I realized the importance of my 2 years in Calcutta. I had every choice to go and study overseas, as my sisters did. And for some strange reason, I had a calling to go to this particular city. But it changed my life because I read the kind of books that are taught in your master's degree.
Right.
And I read so much, and we debated amongst ourselves. That was our conversation when we were sitting around with cups of tea and coffee and what have you. And that really veered me towards being a lifelong researcher, geek, wannabe academic, that I would never ever just only take the surface information, but deep dive, see the subtext, whether I saw a film or read a book or heard a podcast. It was almost like a training that you go under the skin. And that would have not happened had I not spent those 2 years in Calcutta.
And it's quite interesting because your sisters did go and study.
My sisters are very intelligent and they had a different path and an amazing journey, and they went off to study in Sydney and now they live there. One went off to Vietnam. They're all wonderfully bright and kind human beings. Mine was always a struggle with academia, not because I didn't like it, but it was like almost like a chip on my shoulder, like I need to prove something, therefore I need to learn more, I needed
Competitive.
competitive in my own head. It wasn't, I'm not a boastful
With you,
person.
with yourself, yeah.
With myself, like I just had to, I'm like a mole. You tell me to research something, I just go, I burrow myself into, the great sayings about how do you read a book. It's only when you like burrow yourself in and you've dirtied your hands with the filth of knowledge.
Right.
So,
Expression.
and the more you read all this, the more you romanticize this act of learning. And that was me, completely dramatic about learning. And I would go around telling all my friends, I flutter in many ways, but I fly in none. I'm like the intellectual dilettante, because you're learning all these words and these philosophies, and some are highly misplaced, let me tell you. But it was a journey, a joyful, intriguing, curious journey. And so that's a part that never changed. I'm still that person who can deep dive and go completely cockeyed when all I have to do is write 500 words, but I will research like I'm doing a PhD paper.
Right.
And that is the learnings, and I'm very appreciative of that.
Yeah.
And of course, I went on to study further. Then I did my Bachelor of Arts in Literature, where I had to study Victorian literature, Greek literature, you name it, the poetry of the past, and the Miltons and the Chaucers and all of that.
And film.
And then I went further,
Right.
and did my master's in filmmaking, in world cinema, and which was extraordinary because we had such amazing professors who came from all kinds of walks of life, LGBTQ communities. The two most brilliant professors, both LGBTQ activists. So the way they taught us films was always to look at films from different lens, the gender lens, the political lens, the economic lens. So every film resonated with us as students, as master's degree students, in ways that I'd never known. So this all fueled my absolute excitement about being a complete geek and take full pride in it.
Beautiful. So from film, you didn't end up doing film because didn't you go and work in a newspaper?
Well, I did do, my student film, the final product of a 8mm film that we had to do is called A Little Death, which in French is a pâté mort, which is like, in Victorian literature, you couldn't call orgasm an orgasm, you called it a little death. And it was a video, almost like a montage, what you would see as like a music video today, but focusing on gender and fluidity at a time when it wasn't a hashtag phenomenon.
Way before
I had trans women like sort of whipping themselves with Rani pink scarves against the setting sun in New Delhi all kinds of this imagery that sort of taunted and addressed sexuality, and not a squeak of a script. There was not a word that was used. I cut it to Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, which is, when it was played in Paris at the time, he broke all the rules. He was such the dissent, the music of dissent in the operatic world. And when he played the Rite of Spring, there were riots on the streets.
Yes, they weren't happy.
And I thought that would be and it's a very jarring, if you listen to it now too, my gosh, how many rules would you have to break to move away from the lyrical, the classical? And he did it. And there were riots, literally, there were riots on the streets. And so I thought that music was just right for the kind of montage I was creating. So so that was my experience as a
Is
student.
that visible? Can we
You know,
find that
I'm
online?
almost embarrassed. It is so close to my heart because that is when I put 100% of my heart, my soul, my passion, absolute egoless dedication to a student project that didn't make me any money. But I will never, ever feel that level of complete surrender to an art form. And so to have someone say, show it, let's screen it, I'm scared because it's like really opening my heart because it's done as a student film, so it's rough in so many parts and edges and all that. But it's almost like that was really me, unfiltered, because as I got out of the film studies and went to Discovery Channel, hoping that I would be a documentary filmmaker, I realized that how many times you have to like smoothen out the edges of your own self to fit into a commercial world.
So you have to filter. You have to filter. You feel the need to filter.
The industry expects that of you, and that kind of raw energy, that raw passion, that you want to break the rules and have a narrative that is completely eye-opening and may not even be favorable to the people who watch it, but they would not walk out without an opinion. It's different when you enter the industry. And I was in India, don't forget, where everyone who studies films goes straight to Bollywood. And as much as I appreciate Indian cinema, and trust me, this extraordinary, the Indian cinema is historic in what it has produced. But just the idea of this sort of Bollywood that has relegated an entire industry of such talent into what we call in India a tamasha, which means like a circus act, you know, especially
cutting,
in the
yes.
80s, you know, in the 80s and the early 90s, which is like just tropes and tropes of stereotypes and stereotypical stories. That wasn't my scene at all. So going to Discovery Channel was like, I want to be a documentary filmmaker.
Did you ever get bullied in the industry as a woman? Because obviously you're coming in quite early.
You know, I remember going for an interview as a very young person who had excelled in filmmaking in my master's, in my university level, thinking that I have a chance. Because, you know, there were probably thousands of applicants for the course that I did for 4 years. Thousands. And by the end of it, we were only 20 of us were selected. So, and then when you top that, you think, okay, I've got something in me that can propel me forward.
Right.
But, and so I remember going to a very, very big TV channel. And I'm going to say what it is. It's one of the biggest TV channels. It's called ZTV. And sitting with a group of absolutely grown-up, seasoned, cynical men in suits. I was just an item. You know, there's a word in Bollywood where there's one character who has no reason to be in the movie. She's only there to titillate, just to do one song, and she's called the item girl. Item being a street language for if someone is a woman, doesn't matter if she's hot or not, but you know, she can be provoked, like she's an item girl.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so the idea of item is now sexualized. When a woman is sexualized, and in a Bollywood film, she's positioned to do that item number only for the purpose of titillation and nothing else. She's not the protagonist, she's not the hero, no heroine, doesn't have any character in that film. She just performs that item song. So it was funny. I felt that this is not just me. There's generations of women who've sat in front of these guys who are sort of choking in their own ties that have been tied up like knots around their neck, the patriarchal necks, and to sit there and try and tell them that you're so excited to join an industry with all the fervor and commitment, and all you have is a bunch of wankers looking at you with probably their hands already into their pants.
Oh, wow.
You know, and and as I said, you know, I don't come from I came from an environment where we were so protected.
Yeah.
Boarding school, homes that were very loving and conservative to an extent, because in some ways perhaps they were saving us from that environment and to be thrown to the wolves. It's only now, after all these years, I can relive these moments and think, my God, anyone. I have a daughter, I'm a single mom, and she's 19. If she were to sit in front of those guys today, she'd just slap them because she's got the gumption today because the world has changed. I just sat there trying to be polite when I knew their eyeballs are popping out for what?
Yeah.
Like a 19-year-old sitting in front of you who's telling you that you're good at what you do.
Yeah.
So
that must have been quite unencouraging or disencouraging for you in that obviously that film and media and TV is obviously much more misogynistic than, let's say, magazines, which is where you moved to.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. It was discouraging because you go with so much enthusiasm. And then when I joined Discovery Channel, my first real job, and this is Discovery Channel. Who doesn't love Discovery Channel? And in all honesty, that was my ultimate dream, to be a documentary filmmaker. And but again, it was a time when all these big American companies were coming to India. The idea that they are the experts and we are, like primitive cultures sitting there waiting for that experience. And so I was just that assistant, who just brings you your coffee and your tea. And I didn't mind that because sometimes just being on a set teaches you everything. But it wasn't inspiring. At the same time, it served a big purpose for me because the Discovery archive of documentary scripts was accessible to me. So in my sheer boredom, I read those documentaries and was thrilled with the storytelling, thrilled with incredible documentaries made in the 60s, 70s, and all that. And I found a series of documentaries made on fashion. And I was never into fashion, in the sense, of course, we were all well-dressed human beings, but not in the way Paris Fashion Week defines you. What is the trend? It wasn't that. And just to read these, the scripts where the titles were fashion and rebellion, fashion and sex, fashion and politics, fashion and economy, I was mesmerized. I couldn't believe that clothes had a narrative of their own. They lived within a context, lived with human beings for whom clothes are second skin. And so I deep dived. So all my geekiness just came to the forefront. And in my absolute boredom, I taught myself fashion history. So I didn't go and study journalism. I didn't study fashion. I taught myself. However, erroneously, I did teach myself. And I kept putting up my hand to do $20 stories, 500 words. I got $20 for newspapers where, you have to, all the ads are there and then you need to put one editorial to make it look like a newspaper. Right. That was my spot.
Right.
And it was called Times of India. But Times of India is the largest selling English newspaper in the world. So I'm very grateful, even if I got the page that people seldom flip to. And wrote my stories. I just put my head down, 500 words at a time, $20 at a time. I just kept going, created a body of work. And I still remember someone telling me, she said, keep continuing because, everyone's not going to read your story because no one cares about your byline. But 2 people will read it who will get it, and you're going to get the next assignment from them. And that's exactly what happened. And that's when Elle magazine reached out. And then I did a series of great, amazing, interesting work for them. That's when I literally, my training bra in journalism, fashion journalism, was with Elle India. And all the editors there, whether it was Nirza to Nanita Kalra, they were so kind that they let me talk about such difficult topics at a time when, as I tell you, there's no hashtag culture of diversity, gender fluidity, Me Too, Black Lives Matter. None of that was there. But they let me write about fashion and androgyny, where I talked about genderless fashion. I talked about the fluidity that is what we talk about rampantly today.
And is that because women are more comfortable with talking about topics that are more varied, as opposed to men who probably find that uncomfortable? Or what do you think? What is that difference?
No, so I wouldn't put gender on top of this because women are as bigoted as men. In fact, in developing countries, I will tell you that the patriarchy that exists equally in women's heads, as it does in the men's head.
They definitely support the whole system.
And they may not realize it, but they sort of continue. It's a systemic indoctrination that happens not only because of men, but because of women. Women perpetuate it through their sons, right? The very fact the sun is seen as the demigod, even now,
Yep.
in so many parts of the world. And who perpetuates this? It's the mother. So we need to go to the roots of not just bigoted men. The man has grown up thinking he is the prince of the universe, and that he has a say in everything, that he can be dictatorial to the women around him, his wife, his female children, what have you. That comes from absolute indoctrination. How we raise our sons is one of the most important things in the world. And so I don't blame, I wouldn't say that women understand everything. We are lucky that we have tribes of women that we can resonate with. But sometimes, and I've seen this in my own life, women have been women's worst enemies.
Oh, I think sometimes, definitely, usually. And then so what? So you moved from, obviously you moved from Discovery.
That was a big gulp of beer. Yes, I moved from Discovery when
And you totally moved out of
I resigned.
Right.
And very happily, very gratefully, because it was wonderful to work with Discovery Channel, because the programming that they were doing, even if I was not part of it, we would get all the assets that were created, these beautiful folders, the posters, the knowledge, the scientists. It was wonderful. But I did move out because I started taking journalism more seriously. And I was very lucky. I was how do you put it? I was a big fish in a small pond of fashion journalism, which meant that I just intuitively started writing about fashion from the lens of sociology, anthropology, gender, politics, which wasn't being taught, which wasn't being written about at that time. I'm only talking about that time. And I, as I said, I wrote about these things intuitively. So I guess I stood out because I wasn't writing just...
Uncomfortably so, maybe.
I may have stood out uncomfortably, but one thing was clear. I did not write about frills and hemlines going up and down. In fact, if I did write about hemlines going up, then I would relate it to, which is a fact, that every time there's a recession, the hemlines go up. Okay, there's studies done on this.
Oh, wow.
And so I think that made some of the experts in the industry sit up and take notice. And all this while, all I was doing was literally my head down, no idea that I would ever be able to... there's no question, I didn't want to conquer anything or be in a big, professional scenario. I was just so excited about writing and researching. And I think that paid off. And those two people who read my stuff, then another two, and it just happened to be amazing people who gave me great opportunities. So there I was with Elle writing for them, and the great newspapers, and then I would write for international papers, international magazines, and by the time Vogue decided to launch in India, they hired me, and I became in charge of all the fashion writing. So the title was Fashion Features Director for Vogue India. So I was part of the launch group. So
Amazing.
we started
Was
off.
Anna Wintour there at that time?
Anna Wintour was very much there then as she is now.
Right.
And we had a Vogue launch in Milan during Milan Fashion Week, where the core team went there not only to watch the shows, but be hosted by Giorgio Armani as the opening celebratory launch of Vogue India in Milan. And of course, there was Anna Wintour there, and there's Franca Sozzani, and there was Alexander Schulman, and all the designers in Italy. And then that kicked off my journey with Vogue for 13 years.
But you're no longer there, and I gathered that you don't really answer Anna Wintour's phone anymore.
That's not true. She doesn't call me. No. No. I do. I worked for 13 years, the most extraordinary years of my life. And I feel almost scared to tell stories about those 13 years because they are so wonderfully decadent. And I don't think that era is going to come back. It's one of those things that it goes through that kind of heightened experience in fashion, the excessiveness and the joy and creativity, with all of that. if it were to happen in this day and age, it would look irresponsible.
Right.
But I was at that time when it didn't matter because the world economy was rising,
Nobody was
developing
noticing
countries
the
were opening up.
plastic, Nobody was noticing.
No, because it was
oversupply
basically we all fed by, there was hyper-consumerism all over the world. Everything was being fed by what people were buying and selling. And now it's a different world with COVID, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've done that whole journey. So obviously, having gone through each of those steps, you're in the most perfect position to really look back and say, no, this has to stop. And ever since then, I mean, you've become this very strong voice into eco-conscious consumerism and fashion and.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there was no doubt that this wonderful experience I've had with fashion, it was excessive. But when you're not cognizant of what's happening around the world, and you put your blinders on, and your own life is so extraordinary and joyous and going to all kinds of countries. 1 minute you're in Tokyo, next minute you're in Palm Springs. There you are with Raf Simons. The next time you're with Karl Lagerfeld. I was running around doing these interviews with extraordinary creatives, designers. It can make you slightly insular to the world problems. And I'm not saying I regretted any bit of it because none of us knew any better. It's only when the world collapsed and started collapsing with climate crisis, and then eventually when COVID happened, right?
And
That's when
social media, right?
and social media,
I mean,
where
you're a social activist, right? So.
and I hadn't even that journey hadn't even started for me because I was having such a good time being a creative person, but that itself cannot be lifelong, sustaining endeavor to have a fulfilling life. But that comes over time. So I am so lucky to go through these cycles of absolute joy of consumerism, then the guilt of consumerism, the sense of responsibility, and then what is my personal action. So I have loved every bit of my time with Vogue. In fact, I'm literally right back writing for Vogue with the understanding that I can write about stories that have the ethics, the ideology of sustainability, of kindness, compassionate consumerism, made by hand economies, the love of the indigenous, our ancestral provenance. And they're perfectly fine with it. But I had to leave it. So that we could both come. I'm not such an extraordinary writer or such an important person. It's not like anyone's craving for my word count and my writing. It's just, I'm just telling you on a personal note that now going back and writing for Vogue is very different from the way I wrote for Vogue.
It's on your terms as well.
But it's on my terms in the sense it's the topics that I love.
Right.
And they love it too. So I choose to be the activist and remain true to my form by only committing to stories, narratives, all that resonate and are in complete alignment with what I stand for, whether it's sustainability, spirituality, environmentalism, all of it. It has to resonate with that. It's not the problem about the magazines or newspapers. I think it is we need more activist writers. We want to write beautiful stories. We want to write joyous stories, interesting, captivating, provocative. We need more writers who can write about sustainability in a fun way and take it to the mainstream media, to the high fashion magazines, and make it fun for the consumers to understand and participate in that journey. So we are not bifurcated into the world. That's the sustainable world, and that's the fashionable world. They should come together because
yeah. And I was just going to say, and Bali brought that to you, or how?
absolutely, Bali played
to
such
you?
a huge role because suddenly nothing mattered. I didn't have to wear stilettos. I didn't have to wear makeup, even though my iconic black eyeshadow is there in full form. And just being surrounded by nature. You're so in front of nature, so almost naked in front of nature, that you don't have a choice but to rethink your agenda in life. It's almost like every paddy field is staring at you. Every temple gong, every ceremony, everything is related to nature. What is inanimate, what is animate. I mean, we have all these ceremonies in Bali, and I'm Nepali. We have very similar versions of the same Balinese ceremonies where you go and worship technology and the steel and your equipment and like garland a dog. And, I come from a very similar culture. And so it was just going back to the roots. It wasn't difficult at all to say, hey, damn, how do I now change my language, work within fashion, which I love, but also talk about conscious consumerism that we need to buy. Buying helps people live, thrive, be creative, supports millions of people all over the world. The idea is not to buy, but to buy mindfully. What are you buying? Where is it made? How are workers being paid? Are they transparent? What's the entire trajectory of a product that we love? It's not made in isolation by invisible hands. So the idea of fashion so far becoming so invisible about the process. All we knew about fashion was beautiful girls on the ramp, dictated by Paris, Milan, London, New York.
Front covers on fabulous magazines.
Exactly. And while that is beautiful, what goes on behind? Who stitches that button for you? Yeah. Who's making that little butterfly on your Zara t-shirt? And when you do your research, there are these wonderful men and women who are in far-flung countries, underdeveloped, developing countries, who don't even have any representation. You're talking about families in Bangladesh, for instance, women who are not part of the labor industry. They have no rights, no social rights, no political rights. They're not represented by anyone. But they're sitting in their little room
for very, very little money
while they're sewing something with their two kids sleeping with them. And that's when you start thinking about what is going on with fashion.
Right. And
why am I buying something so cheap? Because nothing is cheap. If I'm paying $2 for a t-shirt, if it's cheap for me, someone out there is paying the price for it. Right. And it's always someone who's marginalized.
Who's not getting the money for it, right? The recognition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The reason why it's cheap for me is because someone's not being paid enough somewhere else, who's hidden, who's invisible. So my quest was, let's talk about the invisible people in the supply chain of fashion.
And have you come up with a solution?
Absolutely not.
Bit by bit?
I'm such a small player in this. But I don't take my existence and my tiny little voice for granted. Mahatma Gandhi has been one of the most inspiring, prolific people in my life. And I could cry talking about this because the ethos, the ethics of life that he believed in, one of the most fundamental things was ahimsa, non-violence. Non-violence in thoughts, deeds, and action. He himself said non-violence is not a garment that you put on and off at will. It has to sit in your heart. So that really turned something for me. I thought, I can't wait for other people to make these changes so I can make changes in my life. I'm a human being that participates in this world, so I need to take personal responsibility. What can I do in my own little world, with my own little voice, in my own little platform? What can I do? And that's when I pivoted from mainstream fashion to sustainable fashion. I can't say I'm changing the world or anything of that kind, but I'm changing my own world.
So living by example, which I think is probably...
Correct. I still consume. I still debate whether I really need to buy this or that. But I make conscious decisions in my buying. It was personal responsibility, which I truly believe leads to collective change. And that collective change can cascade into becoming bigger, as we have seen all over the world. How do protests become 2 million people on the streets protesting something in a non-violent way. They've all been influenced by Mahatma Gandhi or Dr. Martin Luther King, all these exemplary people who have shown that we have a right to be dissidents in this world in a non-violent way by taking personal responsibility. And so every time someone says, oh my God, sustainability is so vague and wide, I say, I agree. But why look outside for definitions? Look at your own life. What are the little changes you can make? And that kind of leading to collective change is the only thing. I mean, Vandana Shiva, who's an environmentalist, a quantum physicist, an academic, and she stands for, she stands for all the wrongs that are being done in the world of agriculture, especially what Bill Gates is doing in this world with, GMOs and owning seeds from all different kinds of countries. I love what she says, and I'm going to paraphrase. She says, the trees don't grow from the leaves. They grow from the roots. And the idea of things growing from the roots means that each individual is important. So grassroots is important. And the reason why we are seeing things, what we are seeing, whether it's the war in Ukraine to this dystopia created by COVID, it's a pyramid structure that starts from the top to bottom. It's not the other way around. So ordinary people, the mass of people, have become voiceless because it's that top, that little pinnacle of a pyramid owned by that 1% that is deciding what we should be doing. And so we need to take that ownership, and that starts from personal responsibility.
And if I had to do 3 things in my house within the fashion that I buy, what would your suggestions be?
Buy less. Buy less and buy things of value. That's it. Every time you pick up something, does it have something that you will want to keep it or give it to your children and they can pass it on to their children? Does it have enough value? When I say value, I'm not meaning monetarily. Sometimes something that is beautifully crafted may cost more. So in your mind, it's the same money, because that's how especially teenagers are thinking, right? If I've got $50, I can buy, 8 t-shirts. But I can also buy a beautiful Ikka jacket that is made from Sumba, and that will cost me $50. Do I get that one, or I get that 10 t-shirts, which I'm going to wear twice and shove it in my closet and I don't think about it anymore, and worse, it'll go to a landfill.
Yeah, that's...
So that discerning quality is only yours to own, right? So buy less. We don't need to buy so much. But when you buy things of quality and you're paying the right value for it, know that that money is being trickled down to all the people who have touched that one garment that you've made. Someone turned that cotton into yarn. Someone turned that yarn into a fabric. Someone cut that fabric. Someone stitched the fabric. Someone put buttons on it, embroidered on it, packaged it, shipped it till it reached you. And you're telling me it cost me $2? How on earth is that fair? So that kind of evaluation and logic is for you to empower. And I think that you can do on your own.
Oh, I definitely need to go and look in my wardrobe. Bandana, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I will definitely catch up on this conversation at another point, because I think there's a lot more left to talk about you and your time in Bali, and definitely what you're going to be doing in the future.
Thank you very much to you and the lovely team. And I'm so privileged and grateful. So I love you.
Thank you.